Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle Ellicott. Welcome back to another episode of VCTV. We are continuing our ongoing discussions about what's happening in various industries and technologies around the world, whether it be the latest trends, investments, or just the general macro and micro view of what you need to know to make good decisions, to build successful companies, and to understand what's happening in the world right now. Today on VCTV, we've got a very exciting and very timely discussion to talk about, and that is around biotech and medtech. We'll probably get a little bit into pharma as well. And this is very important because following our previous conversations around blockchain and artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of these are playing a role in these industries, helping to drive them forward, as our speakers will indicate. And just for our audience out there, if you're not familiar with these industries, I did a little research for you. And just yesterday, June 30th, as we've now hit that halfway point in the year, July 1st, welcome. Just yesterday, we actually had a few new industry reports coming out and saying that AI for the medical industry alone, mentioning also biotech, in 2017 was about a $700 million industry and now is expected to reach over 18 billion by 2025. 18 billion. So if you're not paying attention to this market, going from 700 million, just under a billion, to 18 billion, you need to be paying attention. If you're building in this space, artificial intelligence, other research reports that came out earlier this week have already looked at AI as impacting this industry and us globally with over 20 billion, and I stopped counting. So over $20 billion of impact by 2025. Point being, we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk a lot about these industries, a lot about these technologies that are driving these industries today, and how you can be successful in them. So a quick shout out to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for making today and these episodes of VCTV happen. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. At any time, if you have questions, comments, throw them in the chat box. We'll do our best to ask them in real time. If not, we're all available online. We're all available 24/7 socially, so feel free to reach out to us to connect. And let's get started. So to welcome our very first guest, Gwen, welcome to the show. Welcome back. A little introduction on yourself and a little background.
Sure. Can you hear me? So I'm a venture partner at Fusion Fund right now. We're an early stage fund based in Palo Alto, but we invest all around North America. Over half of our portfolio companies are actually AI or AI applied AI. I've recently, last year, started picking up an interest in synthetic biology because it's an intersection of AI, genomics, and biology. So I can talk about those two areas as well. Prior to switching over to venture, I spent 18 years on Wall Street. At the last job I had, Wall Street was actually running a tech portfolio at a hedge fund. So I've seen all different sorts of business models and how companies can make money.
Excited to dive into that because while this industry is so big, it's also about making money in some way as well. And I think that's one thing from the companies I've met in this space, that's one thing that kind of gets swept under the rug. So we're coming back to that for sure. Ned, welcome to the show. Same to you, just a little introduction, a little background from the corporate headquarters of yours over there.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Elena and LA Token for having me. My name is Ned Saleh. I'm the founder of Syncell. We're a startup here in the Silicon Valley, and we have rolled out a test for COVID that is unique and based on the platform that we have invented. Before working on Syncell, I also founded a company called Plasmatica in biotech. We also invented a quantified wellness platform for the mass market that actually departs from the biotech model into the quantified wellness model that's heavily data shifted. I'm a scientist. I come from a technical background. I spent most of my career in the semiconductor industry. I worked for Apple, IBM, Intel. My professional training actually is a nuclear scientist, specializing in plasma physics. I started my career working on applications that are related to transmutation of nuclear weapons into nuclear fuel. That was in the late 90s, early 2000. We did amazing things. The machine that we built at the University of Michigan is currently in Guinness Book. And the great scientist I worked for, my thesis advisor, got the Nobel Prize in 2018. So I moved from a more structured career into entrepreneurship. And I learned that some things you can't really do in a structured environment. You need to go out and take it on your own and raise funds for it. So I bring my perspective to the panel here and the audience as an entrepreneur. And I hope that would be great benefit for the audience.
Wonderful. Go Blue. Raghu, welcome to the show. Excited to have you. A little introduction and background on yourself as well, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. I'm based in Princeton, New Jersey. I've been a lifelong serial entrepreneur. Initially started out in the .com space, then moved into the homeland security space. And since 2015, I've been in the biotech pharma space, as well as cybersecurity space. I've recently, we went public, took one company public a couple of months ago. We're doing another one next month. And I'm interested in social impact type investments. And I got into this, basically I was a coach, a Vistage coach or chair, as they call it, for peer advisory boards in the middle market, in addition to my investments in the startup area. So while coaching these groups, a couple of pharma and biotech companies that I advised and that went public. And I kind of figured in the biotech area, the social impact is a lot higher. And if you can figure out how to find the de-risked opportunities, and that and cybersecurity are the two areas I'm focusing on right now. I was also like a CTO, trusted advisor in the White House for a lot of the e-government initiatives going back to early, a few years of the millennium. And I've been also active in a lot of social impact type activities as well. Welcome, everyone. Nice to be able to participate here.
Wonderful. Excited to have you. Wow, we've got quite a cast so far. Mark and Radhika, that's what you got to live up to. So Mark, to you, welcome back to the show. Good to see you in the last about 23, 24 hours. Quick introduction and a little background on yourself.
Yeah, it's not as exciting, but 20 years experience. I'm more of an operator, raised a fund, I believe about planet, profitable enterprise, and women entrepreneurs. And we really look for that, healthcare and pharma and so forth. I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor, so this is kind of why I invest in that. And have some cool government jobs. One cool thing is, I worked in Area 51. So that's kind of it.
All right, Radhika, I know your background. I know you're going to shine and add to this panel even further. Welcome back to the show, good friend, and a little intro and background on yourself.
Thanks, Kyle. Great to be here. Thanks, Elena and the Leitokun team. Really impressed by many of your backgrounds. It's great. Claim to fame, recently published my book, Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived. Kind of getting through that virtual background. And what else can I tell you? Do a lot of speaking, TEDx speaker, Silicon Valley woman of influence. Have been involved in blockchain for a number of years now, and very focused on healthcare and biotech, pharma, that all of life sciences basically. But in terms of blockchain as a whole, I'm a believer, as Kyle mentioned. It's going to be a great discussion, I think, because I really do believe that all of these advanced technologies are coming together. So it's not just any one thing in isolation. It's the intersection of blockchain and AI, ML, and IoT, for example. And depending on the use case that you're talking about, you're it's pretty exciting days, I think, to see how the technologies are coming together. And that's really where my focus is. I'm founding partner at StarChain Ventures, which is a venture studio based here also in Silicon Valley, as many of you. And looking forward to spinning up a few new companies in these areas, like healthcare or fintech or supply chain logistics. So those are the three key areas. On a personal level, I would say that I'm most passionate about women and getting more women into this space. Also really excited about diversity and inclusion in general. Involved in several personal endeavors. I sit on the board of TI Silicon Valley, which is a pretty great organization based in Silicon Valley, but we've got 61 global chapters in 14 countries, and a lot of the work now that I'm doing through that organization, being on the board and also being a co-convener of the TICON flagship conference, is focusing on emerging technologies. So really excited to be here with all of you today.
Wonderful, outstanding. To our audience, you've got some of the best and the brightest here. If you didn't hear their background, take a few seconds to go back in time, because this is going to get exciting. So let's start off with the big question in the room, and that is, what is happening? What is the current state of these industries when we talk about biotech and medtech? Because we know that the last 6+ months at this point really have accelerated and brought a lot of these to light that may have otherwise been kind of kept quiet, right? Certain processes have changed or gone away. A lot of advancements have kind of, again, come to light in each of these areas. So I'd love to hear your opinions on what is happening in these areas, what's changed, what hasn't, and kind of we'll go from there. So Gwen, let's start with you and we'll go around to everybody.
Sure. So I think one of the quotes I heard was, we spent billions of dollars on national security, probably more than billions. I just don't know the number. But what really took the world down is a virus, right? And so it's not that we shouldn't be spending on national security, but we should be spending a lot more on sort of health, right? We don't have a good monitoring system. We don't have very good testing in the US. So it's really highlighting what's necessary, that there needs to be more spend in that area. I'd also say that, so that's on the negative side. On the positive side, the last 2 years especially has actually really seen a huge improvement in the costs for sequencing, costs for robotic have really come down, not to mention high throughput screening, which is an application of AI to genomics and to protein synthesis. So those costs have really come down because we have these large foundries and these large robotic labs built. And so the marginal cost of these things is coming down to very minimal. And so that part of it, I'm super excited about. So if we can actually use COVID to drive more of the investment dollars to that area, I actually think the future is quite bright.
Absolutely agree. And Ned, same to you.
Well, there's a number of observations that I have made all along as the pandemic was unfolding. First of all, with all the talk that you hear about data and the buzzwords about AI and so forth, we have not utilized data in, number one, predicting that the pandemic will happen to the scale that it did, even though it was folding before our eyes in China. The rest of the world just failed in understanding what that means. What does data mean? What's the impact of data in our lives? And the cost for that is in the trillions of dollars. And not only that, we know now that there are about 7 models that predict the pandemic, and most of these models failed and continue to fail. We can't even predict what's going to happen in the upcoming couple of weeks to a month. So the age of data is yet to live up to the stress test with the pandemic, and we're not quite there yet. So there's a lot of work to be done. There are lots of opportunities for AI. I hope this market space, with all the financial potential that you mentioned, Carl, in the beginning, really grabs this by the neck and put it to use to society. The other thing that I noticed is that, which is positive, is medical publications. Medical publications now from the lab to other researchers' screen, the time has shortened more than ever. It used to take several months and sometimes a year to publish any piece of research. And now we are back to the preprint model, and that has been very useful. Researchers from all over the world are now publishing in reputable journals and very good quality work. We've seen a lot of work coming from Wuhan almost in real time that benefited the medical community all over the world. So this is one of the advantages, and I hope this model continues beyond the pandemic. Also, I want to say that there's a general state of confusion, maybe in part because we are in the election year and there is a lot of polarization and politicization of the pandemic in the news. But the general public, what I noticed from just talking to people and many professionals, seem to be a little bit confused about science. What does the pandemic mean? What is the reproductive number? Are we in or are we out? Does the virus go away in the summer or not? So there's a general confusion within the public about science, and there are bigger issues that of impact, like global warming, that are becoming more of a question in terms of, is the science really working on this mega scale and to the benefit of society? So one of the things that concern me as a scientist is that if public trust in science is going to be shaken, and how we reinstate that. But generally speaking, this pandemic is a black swan. If we try to look back in history and compare it to anything we know, at least in our lifetime, we'll probably fail. It's a new thing. It's really new, and it's even challenging to the entrepreneurial community, both entrepreneurs and investors and analysts. I think we really need to call on all entrepreneurs in the world to step up to the plate and help us navigate through this. There are many sectors in society that were impacted health-wise and economically, and they do need our help. So we need to work together to pull the world out of this mega crisis. And my company is trying to do its part in rolling a solution for that.
Absolutely. And Mark, same to you. So the current state of these industries, so bio and medtech, where are we? What is your macro view of where everything is at the moment?
You're going to see telemedicine really go crazy and be really efficient. You're going to see a lot of hospitals close. And I think because viruses and things like that aren't sexy, and a lot of pharmas shut down their research, that's going to open back up. And I think we're going to progress very far. As far as AI, let's not forget, AI was founded in like 1955. And you know what? Everybody goes blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, it's progressed, but we're still way behind. And so I'm really intrigued by who really captures that AI and actually uses data in anything has not been used properly yet. Maybe Facebook has done the best job, but so I'd be excited to see how it's used really special.
Raghus, same to you. What's the macro view from your side of what's happening in these industries?
See, given my background from the Homeland Security side, although this, I would agree that this is a bigger black swan event than what happened at 9/11. But I'm seeing it took a while for the kind of the government as well as the the entrepreneurs and all to catch up to the kind of the new reality. I think the similar kind of thing is happening now. To give you an example, if you remember before the days of 9/11, some of us would be able to go into the plane and send off people. But now it's a new, different world after 9/11. Similar, see, there was a task force set up at that time in which I was part of that to screen people, through the airports and things like that. So similarly, I suspect something like the Patriot Act has to come out, worldwide, which will kind of address the privacy and security issues coming from these screening and things that are required. And I think they are not yet in place. We're kind of learning on the fly where, there are once the kind of the environment opens up for people to go back to work, how they, screening happens in terms of, ways they can walk through. People know whether you have a fever or you're, wearing clean masks or whatever. So some of those things will become normal as we go along. But other things like, for instance, in the biotech space specifically, I think there's a new awareness of repurposing drugs so that the regulatory cycle can be reduced, right? Because otherwise we are away from a vaccine, like, 1 year, whatever. So repurposed drugs, are very important because the safety profile has already been, gone through. And so some of these, and the other area is because of people working remotely and working from home, and the whole cybersecurity issue is another one that has to be really looked into, because it happened so suddenly, and things like ransomware and some of these hacking is not going away. In fact, it's intensified. So these are, I think, 3 areas that I see: government regulatory stuff, the kind of personal hygiene and screening for this kind of infectious diseases type of thing. Infectious diseases area was not very very popular until now. They thought it was all happening in somewhere else, right? So this has caught the world kind of unawares that it can happen everywhere. And and the third is the cybersecurity. These are the spaces I see a lot of things to have to happen. So
we're going to come back to cybersecurity or data and privacy in general, because it seems to be something that has just never been thought of, and all of a sudden now it's a big concern, and rightfully so. And when we get into things like contact tracing and other applications that we've seen start to come out into the public around medtech and the future of health tech in general, that's a big issue. But when we get into the pharma and the biomedical side, I mean, data is an issue. So we're going to come back to that, Raghu. Get ready. Radhika, same to you. What is your view on the current state of everything in bio and medtech?
So yeah, a lot of my colleagues here on the panel have touched on some of the exciting new areas coming up. I would say privacy, preserving mechanisms, I think, are very key, as you mentioned, Kyle, and a few other people on the panel. I am also a member of the California GovOps blockchain working group, advising California state legislature and Gavin Newsom, the governor. And one of the things we just are coming out with the report we've been working on since last September. And so that'll be coming out fairly soon. By next week, we'll be able to make a general announcement around it. But this report, I was able to contribute on several key areas, and I think it's indicative of the trends and of the opportunities of both government from a policy side, as well as entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs and startups, as well as investments and other partners. This is this kind of public-private partnership, multi-party partnership, which is very blockchain actually, I think is really more in vogue. And main reason is that we really do all have to come together. This is not about developing things in isolation. This is about collaboration. This is about a healthy co-opetition, if you will, mindset. But I think that, one of the things that we're looking at is specifically, and we can address those in future discussion in the panel, but things like verifiable credentials. Raghu, you mentioned about, checking who's had what. Have you been tested? Is the test valid? Have you, in the future, when we have this vaccine, who's been vaccinated? Who was the authorizing issuer of that vaccine? All of these come down to identity. All of these come down to verifiable credentials. So that's a huge area, is privacy and identity, I think, is going to be very, very key. And much like we had the TSA sort of new way of doing things, Raghu, you alluded to that, I think that there's going to be this new way of doing things and being able to integrate the society and the community back together. But in order to do that, we also have to find a way to share information without divulging sensitive information, protecting our private information. That's going to be very key. So AB 2004, new bill out in California that is all about verifiable credentials. And that was pretty exciting just to see happen right as we were working with the blockchain working group. So I think there's a number of different areas that are pretty important and are exciting and are not just applicable in this general post-COVID world, but sort of redefining the way we do business. And so I think that's a big opportunity just across the board, and integrating various technologies. So on the pharma side, I think the Pharma Ledger consortium model is pretty interesting, pretty exciting. It's out in Europe, 12 major pharmaceutical manufacturers and 17 other partners coming together. And it's public and private, it's research institutions, it's government, it's drug manufacturers, it's all of the different players across the board, solving a multitude of use cases. So there's kind of a platform first mentality in this consortium, but I think it's very exciting how they're bringing together different aspects, different stakeholders to work on, I think, 9 important use cases. It's quite a feat that they're going to have to pull off in the next 2.5 years or something like this, as far as a goalpost that they've set for themselves. So this is just a view into so many exciting areas that we're seeing happening. I think we're in for a really amazing ride, if you will, in terms of opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I've read articles recently as well that, you know, the next decades to come, and specifically this next decade, will be a wild ride, and hopefully for the better with all these technologies and industries that we're talking about. But, you know, as I brought up those stats, I mean, we're talking billions and billions. And what's really unique about this, to reference something else, is what each of you are saying. So we're all talking about very macro views of what's happening. And, you know, it reminds me of the early days of the Internet of Things, when this could change the world, right? It could change everything we do. And it's a $5 billion market in the coming years. And then 6 months later, it's a $20 billion market. And then another month later, it's a $1 trillion market. And the point being is similar to what we're seeing shift in shape here in bio and medtech with some of the things that we're about to get to. This is going to be a new normal in terms of business that we look at, right? It's not necessarily going to be biotech, and that's just going to be this unsexy category as people refer to it. Instead, it's going to be, this is something we need to look at. And here's the underlying technology that's driving it, which, Gwen, I want to come to you. I mean, how are you seeing some of these emerging technologies really helping to accelerate these industries, playing a little bit off of what Radhika talked about on blockchain, which we're going to come back to, but you know, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data, blockchain, edge computing. We've talked about all these subjects on VCTV, but how are they being applied to biotech and to medtech to really advance these areas like never before that we've seen?
I'll give you a couple of very concrete examples. So 2002 to 2004, I actually worked at UCSF doing immunotherapy for glioblastoma, which is stage 4 brain tumors. It's a very terrible disease because even after open brain surgery to take out the tumor, the life expectancy is 6 months at most, right? And so it's a terrible disease. We decided, last resort, we're going to get the immune system, the human immune system, to find the tumor and attack it. And so that was the genesis. We actually got it to work in Petri dish, but it took until 2014 for the first human trial to happen. It should not take that long. It should not take 12 years for that process. And I think one of the things that makes me, really passionate about this area, about investing in this area, working in it, is that I have a chance to help shorten that period from 12 years to hopefully even 2 years, right? And so then the question becomes, what's making this quicker? So I think Ned talked about, now we're back to, preprint, which is actually huge during a time of pandemics. So I'm a huge fan of that, even though you do get a lot of, less good publications. But I think it's, just like nowadays, we're all it's on us to sort of dissect fake news. It's also on the scientist part to dissect bad research, right? And so it does place more responsibility on us, but it at least gives us access to that information so that we can decide. The second part I talked about is, just robotics labs. I was on a call yesterday where, it was definitely dominated by AI programmers, and nobody thought it was very impressive to have these, robotic pipetters. And I said, hold on, I come from an age where I did have to pipette, not just 96 well plates, but, 20 of them. And I thought my thumb was going to fall off. Right. And so there is huge benefit to that is, like humans make errors and we get tired. But when you have a robot doing these, you don't have to worry about if the lab technician came in at 2 a.m. to change the media or to test certain things about the cells. It's done, so I think that part really, because another thing that people don't talk about when it comes to bio is that it's the precision part that we're missing. So we can actually print DNA now. David Liu's lab, he's at Harvard. He just put out a publication that his lab has been successful in switching one base in DNA, right? And so this is even more precise than CRISPR-Cas9. CRISPR-Cas9 just cuts it. He's able to replace one base of the ATCG, right? So we're at that level. So what's missing is the precision. Once you do that, how do you fold the protein? How do you not end up with any mutants, any unwanted byproducts? That's the part we're missing. And I think, to Ned's point and to Raghu's point, we are getting to a point where we can use data now to make the yield from 5% to 50, and hopefully in the future, 95%.
Wow. And Radhika, I see you shaking your head. I'll let you chime in. Same to you. We've already talked about blockchain, but I'd love for you to go deeper into that and some of these other surrounding technologies and how they apply to the advancements of bio and medtech.
So I'll kind of piggyback off of what Gwen was talking about. One of the things that's really exciting is applying federated learning models to sharing data. And it's not really sharing data, it's sharing the algorithm, right? So it's all based on AI and ML. And you're basically pooling the results of those algorithms, and it's not really sharing data at all. So from a data privacy and confidentiality perspective, drug manufacturers, for example, are able to share that. And it's almost like you're bubbling up the weights and you're sharing the weights of those algorithms, if you will. And it's an interesting model. It's already being explored and worked on with a consortium called Mellody, MELLODDY in Europe. Very interesting federated learning model, which I think is pretty exciting. Again, AI/ML based. So in terms of the confluence of these advanced technologies like AI/ML and blockchain as federated learning model, I think those are some of those exciting areas when you're talking about data. Because everybody thinks, well, data is the new oil. Well, it isn't really. We're really entering a brave new world where privacy preservation, confidentiality of data, all of those things, especially from an enterprise perspective, really looking at that being an important core element. And so, mechanisms like federated learning are really going to be useful in that. Some of the other exciting areas that I'm seeing, back to that precision topic that Gwen was mentioning. So personalized medicine, I think, is that holy grail. And I think from a pharma perspective, some of the really great areas that we're seeing a lot of advancement in or opportunities as well is 3D printing of drugs and personalizing that. So dosages that can really be precision oriented and saying that can be manufactured on the spot. So you're going to go see, for example, your doctor. They prescribe something and you're going to be able to tailor that prescription to you, the right dosage, the right combination of components. So you're really being able to 3D print that drug while you're waiting, your exit basically from the doctor's office. So I think these are some really exciting new areas where we're seeing tremendous opportunities. So 3D printing of drugs, I would say personalized medicine and how that comes into play, the delivery of care being very personalized. And I think that's the precision point. So not just in terms of DNA level precision, but also delivery of care kind of precision, and personalizing and tailoring it to us as individuals, because let's face it, healthcare still remains to be that one size fits all kind of model. And we're not one size fits all. So we've got to change that. We've got to find a way to utilize technologies like blockchain, where the way to share data across multitudes of parties and stakeholders, including competitors. And I think that's really where the excitement of blockchain is to be able to collaborate across an ecosystem. And I think ecosystem spanning networks and systems like blockchain in combination with other technologies is really where the excitement's at.
Absolutely. I saw Mark, you shaking your head as well. We would love to have your further comments on that.
You know, I totally agree with some of the comments, and Gwen made a very important point. Even from an investment standpoint or an investor, I invested in a company that, we thought we'd do well in 5 years. It took 15 and a half years and got bought out by Johnson & Johnson, and it's doing phenomenal. But I think some of the laws now will expedite that, which will make it an easier investment from an investor standpoint, and also from a success or failure where you're able to pivot. And as far as blockchain, absolutely. I mean, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but blockchain can help you tie the data and kind of like a chain of the 6th degree of separation, right? And so you're able to share data and expedite everything in a successful manner.
Absolutely, and please feel free to go further down on that blockchain trail. I would love to hear more.
Well, like with the cancer company we've invested in, what we're going to do right now. When I was dealing with cancer, I went to a couple of doctors, and each one said something different, and it was like, okay, I'm in stage 1 now, 2 now, 3 now. I'm about to die. What to do, what not to do. How do you do it? And so with this system, really, if you can tie it all together and be like, okay, Mark, these are the different options you can have. We've got them all. Let's start here and go here before you're dead. Instead of having to go to this center in Orlando or this center here or that center there. And through the blockchain and through even the BioTech with keeping the coin and so forth with the scientists, you can keep the data and know, okay, Mark did X and it worked on him. Well, let's try this on you. 10 people it worked on, 15 people it didn't work on. It caused these negative reactions and so forth. So you're able to use that data to really help that person go through. I mean, I've had a friend help pay $190,000 to go to a Scottsdale clinic. Within 2 days, he died. And he's, stronger than me, more powerful, and he was, an Olympian. So cancer is so deadly. And when it spreads, you're gone. And so not from a money standpoint, because I can't put a value on human life. I know actuaries can, but really being able to do that can save lives and really make a difference in this world. And then you can create other, medicines and so forth. So that really excites me.
Yeah, and we may be finally at that time where that's something that matters on a bigger scale as well, right? Again, these industries have been kept pretty private for a variety of reasons, but now it's starting to become something that, to everyone's point thus far, is being accelerated and is a top of mind because it has such impact. And Radhika, I mean, you said it best, is we're not all one size fits all, and the industries themselves are. And even Gwen furthering that, these things have been accelerated from years to hopefully months and sooner to days, where this is no longer thought of as an uncharted territory. Instead, it's just a regular habit and just an industry we all focus on. Radhika, go ahead.
Wanted to make one little comment that, I think where we're at is, I think the technologies are here. Couple of the things that I think are really going to ease the way. Let's talk about political will. It's not about stating our political views on this, but it's about gathering global political will around things that really matter to everyone, not just a select small percentage of the population. So I think the opportunities that I was seeing, for example, being a part of this blockchain working group, is looking at even from the state of California. And let's face it, California is a huge economy. We're 40 million people. We're fifth economy, I think, from a GDP standpoint. It's pretty significant. And I think even to look at systems to roll out or to look at and where the opportunities are going to be from a blockchain working group perspective, and how we can help sort of lay out the groundwork in terms of where the opportunities are, that's huge. And I look at that and I think that's pretty exciting, because it's about harnessing political will around things that are really going to matter. From a regulatory perspective, I believe, it's not a hindrance, but we should partner together with the right regulatory bodies. The regulatory bodies are there to protect us as consumers. And so let's forge these partnerships in strategic and meaningful ways. Let's bring political will around these areas to create legislation that is going to spur innovation and support it, rather than stifle it and hinder it and bring these impasse about. So I think that's really where I see, I just wanted to add to that, is in terms of deployment and implementation, we're going to need a lot of different varied partners coming to the table to ease the way into this next stage post-COVID.
Yeah, these industries are very different. It's not you build an application, you build a website and you hit go. Right? There's human life or lives in general at stake here, and real disasters that can happen. Raghu, I see you unmuted and then muted, so I'm going to come to you anyways. What are your thoughts around this? And Ned, I got you. Don't worry. So Raghu, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as Radhika was saying, I think the one of the aspects I wanted to highlight is the privacy and data privacy, and as well as data protection, because as you know, now it's a global world and there's all kinds of things happening like ransomware and things like that. One of the platform companies that I'm working with is called Split Byte, and what they are bringing is a platform where they actually, it's kind of like a secret sharing, where like suppose you have a treasure map, you kind of tear it up and give it to five, six different people. Unless everybody comes together, you cannot get back at the map, right? It's a similar concept that they just split the data out and then like put it in different buckets, right? And if somebody comes and actually breaches one of the systems, there's safe harbor protection. They cannot actually get at the data. It's just random numbers. You have to actually compromise all of the sites and then so that you can reconstitute the data. So that is a very exciting platform for data privacy and protection, right? And it is a little bit better than encryption, because encryption, this could run on top of encryption, but also encryption still does not give you this kind of cooperative security. Like you can also use it for like joint venture type things where escrowed data, right, can be on different systems, and unless all the partners agree, you cannot actually get back to the original data, and there is redundancy built in. So this is one platform that I'm right now working on, which I think has a lot of exciting possibilities, both for consumer protection as well as IP protection as well, both sides of the game.
Yes, absolutely, Ned. Same to you. What are you seeing with these emerging technologies? Where are things moving and shifting?
Yeah, well, speaking of, my company is trying to participate on the front of innovation in addressing the bottlenecks that exist today, especially in testing for COVID. Testing basically is the point where data is generated. And the contribution that we're pushing in that direction is that it's time for hardware to be decentralized. We've seen this in the cell phone model. We all walk around with a supercomputer on us called our cell phone, and it has enough computing power to have taken us to the moon several decades back. So there's a lot of innovation now in hardware, and part of this innovation actually is in biotech. So what my company offers, and we believe in that as a general principle, is that now you can have your biotech station at home at an accessible price point because of innovation. So one of the things that we are pushing and implementing in our technology is the model from medical and biotech into quantified wellness. We look at human wellness as an overall value and overall task, including the data that can be generated and placed in a network where analytics can be created and mostly driven by artificial intelligence. We don't do this today with medical data. We can't actually do that because of regulatory silos. But if you think of an expanded model where the raw signal has high fidelity coming from really high-end hardware that is decentralized, that's owned by individual people in the mass market. And this high fidelity data or signal is placed in a network, a decentralized network, could be extremely useful in creating automated analytics that can be shared with decision makers, can be shared with financial analysts. I can't place a value on that. We know how much the stock market crashed early in the pandemic. We know unnecessarily because it recovered most of that. And it was all because of panic and fear and not necessarily a tangible economic damage that was inflicted in just a few weeks. And that was because of lack of data and lack of analytics. And that in a model, in the model that we offer, could have been avoided. And that brings us to the concept of a decentralized network or blockchain. I think the blockchain is very suitable for an implementation of a data network where the data creation is decentralized through what we can think of as the Internet of Medical Things model, which is what we're trying to push in with our technology. But by doing that, number one, we solve a big problem of data ownership, and we know the conundrum today of data ownership that that various regulations in the data segment, including California here, we have the CCPA, we're leading among the world. The problem with the gap, the data ownership gap, is that the data aggregators are not the data creators, and that really remains the core and root problem that we need to solve. And the solution that we offer through what we call vertical integration is to make the data creators are the same as the data aggregators. And we do that through this decentralized hardware model. If we have capable hardware, capable technology in the mass market that's owned by every individual, and they can create medical data, and in our case, test data for COVID that we offer, then you have a situation where individuals control and own their data. And not only that, we can take this to the next step where data is monetized since it's now controlled by the individuals who created it. And in a network like the blockchain, that can be done through tokenization. So I'm personally interested in the tokenization aspect of the blockchain that allows people to monetize in a very efficient way the data and the digital assets that they create. And we hope the future will show us how we can do that. And COVID is a great opportunity to implement this.
Radhika.
Yeah, just Ned, you touched upon a really great point, which is data ownership. So I'm a big proponent of data sovereignty. So I think self-sovereign identity, SSI, as well as decentralized identifiers, DIDs, I think those are really going to be the foundational blocks. Being able to protect our identities in very critical ways. And being able to secure that data. You talked about the second point, which is edge security. So I think that, as we are seeing just a massive proliferation of sensors, devices, and so on. And so in healthcare, when you're really talking about the future of personalized medicine and personalized care, you're really talking about integrating remote monitoring, 24/7 remote monitoring technology, which is really available. But in order to be able to deploy that en masse and still protect people's identities. We're really going to have to think about edge intelligence, which is being thought of, and you talked about the analytics portion, but also edge security. So I think that both of those things on the edge perspective, those are going to be key. And I think, Raghu, you're nodding your head too, because I think that, cybersecurity and edge security, those are critical things that, we're going to have to protect. And I think blockchain, in terms of privacy preservation, confidentiality of data, protecting sensitive information, those are all things that are going to have to happen as much at the edge as they are in terms of at the aggregation level.
Absolutely. Raghu, go for it. I saw Mark and Gwen shaking their heads as well. So we'll start with you, Raghu.
Yeah, the edge security, in fact, when I mentioned split byte, we have this concept of reconstituting data from different sources. You can actually push it as far to the edge as possible. For instance, you could have a mobile app. Let's say there is some sensitive data like earnings reports, or it could be medical data. Only the person who is supposed to, or the people, restricted people, can only actually even get at the data, because they have that thing to kind of reconstitute the data from, which is spread over a lot of places and randomized. So people cannot even if they breach in, there's no way to get at the data, right? So those kind of technologies are very, very, this secret sharing algorithm has been around since 1979. But until the real reason is there, like something like need for privacy balanced with, being able to, now that the cloud is there, right? Everybody wants to use a cloud infrastructure, but there are a lot of limiting factors for putting sensitive data out there. And also, there's regulatory issues, right? So those things, if we can address, like safe harbor encryption is one. Then I think, as Radhika pointed out and Ned pointed out, the technology is there, but we have to kind of bring these into the framework. Just like cloud kind of happened, all these things are going to burst forth very soon.
Well, we've talked about technology being there, and I'm going to come back at the end about how far are we away from a lot of this stuff really happening. But Gwen, I want to come to you. You brought up business models. We've talked about a ton around technology. That's great. We've integrated technology into these industries. These industries are very expensive, very research intensive, very tight investments. New and emerging technologies also generally expensive, but the costs are coming down. Where's the business models? Where are the businesses, where are companies generating, or how are they generating revenue in these areas? And you brought it up in the beginning. You've got a lot of research and knowledge in this space. So I'm going to let you kind of just take this and tell us a little bit more about where the opportunities are.
So I think from an investor's perspective, what really excites me is that because the costs have come down so much definitely the last 6 years, but especially the last 2, that some of these used to be just, $5 million R&D one-shot deals. Now, they're actually VC investable, which means, you can invest 1 to 2 million and have 10 to 20 shots on goal, which means that, you actually might get something out of it. So that's the number one thing that is super, very encouraging. I would say that on the flip side, I like to give both, the bright side and the less bright side. I've been talking to a software company that is trying to predict a form of organ failure. So clearly huge savings for Medicare and Medicaid. And this particular organ failure or this particular organ disease costs Medicare about 20% of its spend, right? So it's a big one. And so working with the founders, one of the biggest challenges is actually EMR data, electronic medical records, because of the way EMR has happened. It's basically the data is owned by 2 companies, right? And so the other thing is, even though AI is smart enough to churn through, all the doctor records and, do image recognition of the handwriting, the records are so bad that it's, and this is not a criticism on doctors, they're just operating under the incentives that they're given. A lot of these records are for billing, right? Like 80% of medical records are for billing. It's not to describe how the patient is. So now we have technology that can digest the data, but the data is crappy. So we actually, talking to the entrepreneurs that are working on this, we have, I totally agree with the rosy future that we can see, but the actual dirty part of the work is, that's what we need help with right now.
So before we move on, I want to go one level deeper. So the business models.
Yeah,
how
so
are
I
people
think it
making
depends.
money on this?
Yeah, it really depends on if you're talking about the data software side or if you're actually doing wet lab research, right? Those are two very different roads that you can take. If you're doing actual research, it does become, an R&D project. How many hits on goal do you have? How many shots do you need to take before you get a hit, right? So it's it's a little bit like going to Vegas, but you can make more calculated bets. For software, it's a lot clearer, right? It's, if you can save Medicare 20% of its spend, you can probably charge them 2% for that, right? So that's more of a traditional software model. So it just depends on which one you're in. But I do think that even for the R&D model, very few are actually thinking about eventually selling to consumers or to a hospital or something like that. Most of the exits are still going to be acquisitions, but that's true for most tech exits as well. It's not IPO.
I see heads shaking everywhere. Radhika, we're going to start with you, Mark, and then Raghu. So go ahead, Radhika.
So Gwen, I think you brought up some really great points, but I think these are where the opportunities are. So just in terms of business models and how things are coming together, on the research side, Pharma Ledger, for example, is really an exciting initiative. And I think over the next 2-3 years, we're going to see a lot happening out of that consortium. Main reason is that they're focused on multiple areas that, well, the pharma industry in general cares about. There's drug research, right? So Melody, I mentioned Melody earlier, that's very much focused on drug research and being able to share those weighted algorithms with the players in the network. And so that's an unusual consortium sort of model, again, sharing the weights of those algorithms. The other thing is that Pharma Ledger bringing in some really very disparate stakeholders. So on the research side, they're bringing together leading universities. I think that these public-private partnership sort of models in consortia, I think this is, from a business model perspective, is going to be very interesting because now it's not so much the acquisition of data, which is really what everybody has been struggling with because they are all siloed. This is about sharing maybe results of those data instead of sharing the data itself. So I think the business models are going to shift around that. So the usage of data is going to be really the key focus rather than the acquisition of data. Obviously, there are multiple things that need to be secured, like the edge security, like we were talking about. But I think that, if data is really then construed as this is something private and confidential, and the identities are protected as well in that process, I think that the focus then changes from, well, right now, all the business models are, well, we've got this great data, we're going to mine it, we're going to do stuff with it, right? So I think that model has to shift. It's about shareability. It's not about saying, how can we hoard this data? I think a lot of the systemic issues that we've seen across the board in industry, not just in health and pharma, but also just in general around data and privacy, has been about mining data. So I think that, when we start really rethinking how that problem gets executed and how we implement those solutions with privacy and identity being protected at the core, these decentralized models are not just for decentralized IoT or decentralized data networks or what have you. It's about decentralized AI. So I'm a member of the Decentralized AI Alliance. And so one of the core tenets of that group is really looking at how we can decentralize AI altogether. And so I think all of this hoarding business model really has to shift if we're all going to benefit from it. So I think you really to deconstruct these silos that have continued to be pervasive and destructive, I think, from a global perspective, how you come together and how you gather political will around certain things that where it's sharing that's going to be the model. I think you have to shift the entire mindset. And so this is where I think blockchain and that decentralization mindset and the ethos of that is really going to shift business models as well.
Mark.
Well, I agree with both comments, and I definitely agree with Gwen. I've dealt with doctor notes, and I'm a logical and practical guy, and I've got several cases where I've seen it. You say X to the doctor, and the doctor tells you Y, and then it switches to another doctor, and it's Z, and you can go to different doctors in the same day and get the same medicine. So that really has to be fixed 100%. Because again, if the data isn't the actual data, then you have a problem there. So you need the quality of the data, and to a point where an individual, he in his eye, he had a hemorrhage, but the doctor told him it was a hemorrhage, but gave him a medicine for uh, 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 kind of like a infection, and almost lost his eye, because for a hemorrhage you're not supposed to get anything. So that's also very critical. Now, from an investment standpoint, I'll go back to this. It's still, like she said, Gwen said, like Russian roulette, like, this and that. So I still look for that special doctor, that special person that's really passionate and maybe a little crazy. And then from an investment standpoint, if I know it's going to be a lot of money, I get people who are passionate, really, really passionate in it. If you've gone through cancer, if you've had family gone through cancer, you're passionate in it. You can't just look at it anymore as an investment, because unless it's like a stage 3 or it's gone through FDA and blah, 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 and it's really far, far advanced. And if it's in the beginning stages, you got to have that passion, and you got to support that person all the way through and let him do what he's doing and not raise capital. Because if he's raising capital, he's not working on the cure and getting it done. And there are some brilliant people. I've dealt with Stanford, brilliant, but they can't raise money. But you got to support them and put the processes, as long as they're not maniacal. I worked with a brain surgeon who's just, too self-centered, and that just doesn't work. You've got to have people with confidence, not an ego, so they can work with you to pivot. But you support them with the money, and you go all the way. And is it worth it? Yeah. I mean, if it goes big, it goes big. But if it doesn't, again, we're dealing with human life, right? And I'm like, if we're going to deal with video games and how that's going to make fun, why not go all the way with that? So creating jobs and saving lives, it's just awesome.
Raghu.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on what Radhika was saying about shareability. I think, as you know, just because of the way the regulatory setup is with the FDA and all that, a lot of these data, except for the data that if something is successful, it gets put out in the public domain, as well as, I guess things like unmet needs and side effects are all available. But the failure data, which is also very important. So many things were done which didn't work. That is actually kept within a company, and that actually is a gold mine for other people to innovate on top of at least knowing what failed and what didn't work. Knowing what you don't know is very important, and that part, I think, somehow it has to be addressed so that that data can be shared, and the people who own the data also get some stake in whoever is working on top of that. So that part is one of the companies that I was working with. There's this brilliant bringing together of IP, which is published, patents and things like that, along with the side effects and the data that is there, and automatically using AI to kind of come up with different. The discovery part is the most risky part of biotech, as you all know. This is to take care of finding those potential, drugs that might work, and also especially repurposed drugs, so that you cut the regulatory cycle down. So that is one innovation. The other things I look for when I'm investing is a platform type technology, something like a delivery mechanism or something like that, which can work with multiple drugs. So it's not one shot at the goal, but you're providing like a platform technology. And infectious diseases, which wasn't very sexy some time back, is now kind of in the mainstream. So I look for it there. So those are kind of the parameters I look at from de-risking.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I want to get to diligence in just a minute as to how we're looking further at the diligence, because looking at the company on its top level is is definitely what we've talked about, but going a level deeper, looking at things like patents, looking at medical journals, looking at what's real and what's not. I want to come back to that, but before we get there, a few quick questions, and that's this one might be a little big and not so quick, but we've talked a lot about all these things happening, and some to come. But what are the roadblocks that are still holding this industry back? Radhika had brought up a little bit on politics. There's a little bit on regulation, but what other roadblocks are holding these industries back, and why, from really accelerating like others? And let's start with you, Raghu, and we'll go around.
Sure. I think innovation usually happens in small businesses. It doesn't happen. The large businesses it's very hard. Even innovation models within large businesses where you have like kind of skunk work groups, right? So the incentivizing of innovation, most of the technologies are there. It's about partnering and putting them together to make a difference, right? That incentivization has to happen, which means like the current regulatory process, for instance, with the FDA, I know that it's changed a lot given the pressure that they've been facing. That is one. I think they have to figure out ways to build on top of existing information, make that available, shareable, as well as allow entrepreneurs all over the world to be able to do the innovation on top of what is available. The sharing as well as awareness of data, and of course IP rights. And the patent process, again, I think there is some limitations there in terms of how it is enforceable around the world, as you know. And that is another thing. I think most countries are coming around now, so that the IP is protected. So I think those are large reform areas.
Gwen.
Yeah, I think so we have some of the sort of, I call it hardware, right? Whether it's foundries or robotic labs, we have some of that built, but I think we're probably only halfway there. The other aspect is definitely, we have data is just as much part of that. What I mean by that is, we do have the cost of high throughput screening coming down dramatically the last 2 years, but it can come down a lot more, right? And what I said about accuracy that's necessary in biotech, the more data we have, the more accuracy we can give it. So that's actually, you can almost think of that as sort of a fixed cost, just like building a foundry and building a lab, right? And so, but I think, there hasn't been, and to some of the panelists' points earlier, there almost needs to be a political will to do that, because it's kind of like building a bridge, right? It's a lot of cost up front. You're definitely going to get benefit, but you don't know if it's going to be in the next 3 years or the next 10 years, right? And so, from a private investment perspective, that's a very difficult decision to make. But if it's from a government or from a global consortium perspective, that's a very easy decision to make.
Radhika, I feel like you've got a comment to add on this. Would you like to add?
Comments on a few panelists' perspectives. I'll come back a little bit, because I think that this is not only the opportunity, but it's also a challenge, is identity. I think that, data ownership is really going to be game changing. Mark, you were talking about going to Dr. A, Dr. B, Dr. C, on down the alphabet, right? Well, shifting that entire focus into person-owned data, self-sovereign data, that's really going to be a big game changer, because no matter who you visit, whatever doctor you're at, you've got full control and ownership. So it's SSI and DID in combination that's really going to be changing. Is it going to be easy to implement? I don't think so. So it's not for just a willy-nilly reason that when HIPAA was conceived, they only talked about the privacy aspect. They did not address identity. They sort of pushed that out further on, and they said, that's too complex. We're not going to deal with that. We're only going to talk about privacy. And unfortunately, we're seeing the fringes of that where we've really exceeded that limit, where it's not just privacy anymore, it's about data ownership. And so I think that, from an implementation perspective, this is not only the opportunity, but it's also a challenge. The other thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of difficulties, as you mentioned, Kyle, where are some of the challenges? Governance. governance is not an easy task. And I think that part of executing around political will, or executing around will in general, around shared purpose, if you will, or shared goals, is around governance. How do you bring disparate partners to the table? And although these consortia have popped up and there's tremendous promise and potential with these consortia and what they're going to be what their output is going to be. Look at Pharma Ledger with a very ambitious goal over the next 2.5 years, over 9 different major use cases. That's pretty significant. So I think that the governance model around these are going to be critical. I think there are governance standard sort of committees, if you will. Look at the IEEE P2145. I'm a member of the Governor Standards Committee, basically. And so, you know, I haven't been as active just recently because of other things, but I'm just saying that even having a group like that, looking at unifying or trying to be that Rosetta Stone of governance standards across different networks, I think we're going to have to look at how these governance models are going to have to be what are the best practices for executing good governance, right? And for establishing good governance models going forward. And so I think that's a challenge as well as an opportunity.
Absolutely. And I want to, and Mark, feel free to comment. I see you shaking your head. Ned,
I mean, that totally resonates with me. And again, I deal with real situations. I have a tumor in my neck, and the doctor I was going with, who I liked and everything, got in a fight with my insurance company, not with me, just with his deal with them, cut him out, doesn't want to use it. Okay, so I switched doctors. The new doctor goes, he's not willing to release your MRI. Mark, I need you to go 90% for me, and I'll go the other 10% to get you healthy. I need you to go get that MRI. So I drive 2 hours, sign the paperwork and everything. He doesn't release it. I had to get an attorney. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And it's not like I wanted to get rid of him. It's not like I did anything bad for him, you know? And so, luckily I have that ability. Otherwise, that's just not right. So I totally agree about owning your own data. And when it's like that close, it's very sensitive.
Ned.
Yeah, so adding to what everybody else on the panel said, as I said, the approach that we took is more to the root cause of really making the data creators or the data owners through the vertical integration that I mentioned. I think this is the root cause that we can address. But in the meantime, through innovation, some regulatory issues can be addressed. In our case, we're creating a BioTech or quantified wellness device. So we have to fight with the regulatory aspect, both on the medical front and on the data front, because we create quantified data. So there is a sweet spot where we were able to operate, and it's becoming beneficial for us. On the hardware front, as you know, it's very difficult to go down the route of free market notification. It's very expensive for a startup, and it takes very long, and it's not fair for investors. So there are models of direct to consumer and wellness now that the regulators are trying to give some leeway. It's a nascent regulatory path under these de novo approaches. So this is one way we're trying to break through the siloed and rigorous medical device regulation path. On the data aspect, there are sweet spots. While I totally agree with Radhika, I subscribe to the school where people should own and monetize their data. I actually look at it as a matter of as human rights and civil rights, that we should own our data just like we own our property and our right to vote. But in the meantime, there are innovations around differential privacy, zero knowledge proof, and homomorphic algorithms. I'm not going to go down this path, but there is a way to create data, to analyze it, while the data is de-identified. You can think of it as a black glove box where you stick in your hands and you build Lego blocks. You know what you're building, but you can't see it. There are innovations in data science that could operate in a safe zone where you're benefiting from creating analytics in a decentralized network like a blockchain, and at the same time, you're preserving the privacy of the data. So that's on the regulatory front where, especially from my perspective as an entrepreneur, there are hurdles that drag the manifestation of all this innovation. On the other side, there's also the fundraiser and access to capital. Innovation alone is insufficient. Even as Raghus said, just to file a patent, it is going to be a cost racked up upfront. And in order to build a strong IP portfolio like the one that we have, you have to invest a lot in IP. And IP is only one line item on the ability to access capital and execute. So there are innovative ways now that entrepreneurs can access through crowdfunding, not in the simplistic way that audience might think, but there are crowdfunding platforms right now that are available to accredited investors, and companies and entrepreneurs have to go through a thorough diligence process just to be listed. And that kind of releases the pressure of having to entrepreneurs to take their pitch to one firm after the other. And frankly, there are big ideas that are not really easy to get across. One of the things that I occasionally say is that if Facebook or Google are to pitch their companies today, they may not get funded. So
very possible. It's very possible. And these are big, complex areas, which is why I want to get into this next subject real quick. And Gwen, I want to come to you as kind of an expert in this space, and that's around diligence. So diligence around bio and medtech companies, I would argue that it's quite different, to Ned's point, than the Facebooks of the past. And you have a lot more to look at. You have a lot more that may be very nebulous in the fact that it's for future forward and not right in the moment to quantify. So from your perspective as an investor, how should other investors really be looking at diligence in determining investing in this space as well? And then we're going to come to a quick lightning round with a few fun questions.
Sure. So on AI, I actually went ahead and just started coding and just learning to code myself, so I can actually read through the code and make sure there's real AI rather than AI washing. And I think I was on another panel where one panelist and I agreed that we actually both hate the word AI because it's so broad. So I want actual algorithms, right? Are you using convolutional neural net, or is it recurrent? And just because the applications are completely different. And I think you actually should take the same approach, which is know the science that you are investing in, and not just the hope of what the science can be. And it's fine to invest in hope, but then just know that that is hope. So one of the things I do is actually I start digging into research. And I think Ned talked about one of the greatest things that we have now is we have a Bio RX or something. It's preprint. So before it hits any of the big Nature Cell publications, you can actually read the preprint. So that means whatever your founder is telling you, you can actually see if they've submitted for publication, what the results were. And then the other thing I do is, none of us can know everything, especially when it comes to very specific lab science, is just seek out who the world expert is in that area. And half the time I've found that they've been very willing to talk about the area that they're passionate about. So you just learn that way.
Absolutely agree. Now, a few quick questions as we're reaching the top of the hour. I think this will be a little fun. Radhika, you've already mentioned a few opportunity areas, but I feel like there's a few more. So we've got identity, we've got cybersecurity from Raghu, Mark, Ned, Gwen, super quick. where are the opportunities to invest and or build in this space? Super quick. Ned, let's start with you.
I think there are opportunities now for hardware. There are new testing and data collection innovation in a decentralized way in the mass market that are worth seriously looking into. There's like extreme PCR. There's the model that our company is rolling out based on isothermal testing. And there's a lot of innovation based on CRISPR and genetic scanning that is a good niche right now and has an immediate use in the market. So it's an innovation niche that I think investors should look into seriously.
Awesome. Mark.
Well, health is wealth, right? So wellness, infectious disease, and telemedicine, and yeah, kind of what Ned said, I'm all for too.
Gwen.
I have a view that you should never close yourself off to, to aspects, to sort of subsectors that you haven't considered. So we talked a lot about genomics. We talked a lot about diagnostics. There's been a lot of hardware foundries that are already built, but there could be more, right? Just depends on what technology is coming out. Sequencing has taken a huge leap forward with NGS. So if you missed that, you would have missed huge returns there. So never say no to anything, just be open.
And Gwen, I want to nerd out for a moment. You mentioned this in your introduction that you're also nerding out as well around synthetic bio, and you wanted to have a chance to talk about it. So AI, bio, and genomics mixed together. So I got 30 to 45 seconds for you. Nerd out with us. Tell us what synthetic bio is and why it's something we should be paying attention to now more than ever.
Yeah, so ultimately, I don't think what China did with the HIV babies was right, but ultimately, hopefully we can get there, but we are not there. We're nowhere near there, just in terms of the precision that I mentioned earlier. But if that's where we want to go eventually, is to cure disease before it even manifests itself, we need stepping stones to get there, right? And so right now, the stepping stones we have, I was on a call yesterday where I mentioned, if it's E. coli or certain strains of yeast, we actually know how to program those quite well now with the precision that I mentioned. And so we just need to progress to more complex organisms to get there. It's going to be a long way, but it's very exciting. So to Mark's point, the best part of a cure is prevention, so that you never get the disease in the first part.
All right, lightning round. Thank you, Gwen. We talked in the very early introduction of the show that by 2025, we're going to see billions of dollars in these industries, right, as technologies come to emerge. So fun question of the day is, in your mind, what does 2025 look like? And then we're going to get to closing thoughts. So quick view on what you think we're going to see in 2025. Ned, quick.
Well, I think 2025, by 2025, COVID will be over. It will be part of the fabric. So we're going to go back to quote unquote normal life, and the residual knowledge and experience that we had through the COVID crisis will be a lot about data ownership, value of data. It will be massive awareness about biotech and its impact in our life. We'll see this in terms of people who want to study biology. It will see also biology becoming a matter of national security.
Right.
So telemedicine and health and wellness in general will be a learning experience out of COVID.
Got it, guys. We're at the top of the hour, so I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to this. So quick responses. So Radhika, 2025, what do you see in this picture around bio and medtech?
So personalized medicine, personalized healthcare. I think that's huge. I think we're definitely going to be on the way to doing that. And adding to all the other panelists' views, prevention is definitely worth more than a pound of cure. So I think that the focus on wellness and on centering a confluence of different technologies so that we can make it not only personalized, but focusing more on prevention rather than anything else. I think that's going to be key. So I'm hopeful for 2025 in that front.
Raghu, quick 2025, what does it look like?
Yeah, I see, just like you are looking for vaccines from preventive perspective in biotech, in the data as well, you need a vaccine where, you can get infected and you don't have to test and then respond, reactively. So that is one. And then I think sharing of data while preserving ownership. Yeah.
Mark.
Insurance companies building a prevention code, which they don't have, and that's why we don't have prevention now.
Curveball. All right, Gwen.
So I don't actually foresee huge stepwise functions for the next 5 years, but I do think that the speed at which we innovate is going to be a lot faster. The cost is going to be lower, so that's the part I'm super excited about.
Get ready, everybody. 2025 is coming faster than we know it. All right, closing thoughts. Very quick closing thoughts. And where can everyone find you? Gwen, let's start back with you.
I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Gwen Cheney. Pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Mark, quick closing thoughts, and where can everyone find you?
Mark Hamadi, Google me or ask my puppy, my Maltese, Curtis.
Wonderful. Raghu, where can everyone find you, and any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, everything. And I think the closing thoughts are that I try to look for de-risked opportunities with social impact. So if anybody has such opportunities, I'm happy to help you in any way. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ned, quick closing thoughts, and where can everyone find you?
Closing thoughts. I'm going to be on a podcast tomorrow, and I will show that the COVID crisis is not nearly as bad as being advertised using data. And look for me. My QR code is here, sensal.com. I'm on LinkedIn. Just find me, Ned Solly.
Wonderful. Radhika, where can everyone find you, and any quick closing thoughts?
Probably LinkedIn and Twitter, not as heavy on Facebook, unfortunately. But yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter, I would say.
Wonderful. Where can everyone go to get the book? I'm shamelessly plugging you.
Thank you. Well, just type in Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived, and lots of great stuff in that book for people to explore. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, each and every one of you, for your time today. This was a very important and timely subject, and it's also a very exciting subject looking forward to 2025 and beyond, as all these things hopefully will come true, and we'll see a very more personalized and exciting world ahead in these spaces. To your audience, thank you for tuning in. Hope you took something away. If you didn't, go back to the beginning and rewatch, because there is a ton to talk about and listen to in this show. In terms of the research that I shared earlier and some of the things mentioned in today's episode, we will put those links to share with you out into the world, so you'll get a chance to dive into that research, get a chance to read Radhika's book, and also hear some of the things that Gwen, Raghu, Mark, and Ned have also touched on as well. I'm Kyle Ellicott. A big thank you to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for bringing us together. If you liked today's episode, thumbs up all around. Make sure you click the subscribe button, and we'll see you back here tomorrow on another edition of VC TV. Bye, everybody.